All right, so it looks like we're recording now. Great, so just so we know, some SARC services that are available to you all. We have peer tutoring, which is both individual and group tutoring that's available to all UCF undergrad students, usually in classes that are historically very difficult or have a high rate of dropout and withdrawal. And you can make appointments for those or come in during the group session times that usually take place in the SARC lab, which is in TCH at Trevor Coburn Hall. We also have supplemental instruction, which is my department, which is a little bit different than peer tutoring in the sense that it is group study sessions, so nothing individual, and they are specific to certain professors. So they know exactly what a certain professor is assigning, what their teaching style is, what their expectations are, and the way that their exams work. So they sort of do study sessions that are specific to that professor, and it's very driven by group work and interactive collaboration in those study sessions. We also have academic coaching and engagement, or ACE coaching, which is for folks who want to learn some different study skills, time management skills, and just kind of adjust to college life and have some extra support for having those additional responsibilities. And then we also have academic success workshops like the one you're in today. So we have these throughout every semester, and so you can keep an eye on the SARC website for any future upcoming ones. And then we also have online support through our website where you can find additional resources and readings as we go through each semester. So we'll get started with the actual discussion. So for anyone, again, who wants to interject, how has procrastination affected you personally since beginning in college?
College is still my work, because I feel like I'm constantly trying to catch up to things.
Yeah, it's a feeling like you're behind and you're constantly having to play catch up.
Yeah.
Yeah, also like last minute. They're like,
Yeah, so when you say it's really bad for you, what does that sort of entail?
it's like, it's not effective. I feel like I'm most rushed at the end, and I'm not giving like 100% effort. Assignments.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is that it's not your best work or your best foot forward, and you know that you can do better than maybe what you end up putting forth with the limited time and energy that you have left over to do those assignments and projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if there's anyone else that's in the chat or anyone on Zoom that wants to interject as well to add to this conversation, this is a judgment-free zone here, so any interaction is welcome. Check the chat. If any of you have any thoughts going forward that you want to share, feel free to enter it in the chat and we can discuss it together. But we'll go ahead and move on. But that's a really good point that the two of you made. What are your names again? Daniel and Allie, thank you. All right. Hello. Welcome. Have a seat. Yes. Have a seat. So kind of thinking about what college comes with, there's a lot of new challenges that may be different from when we were in high school, or if we took a gap year before we entered college, maybe some new responsibilities and stressors that may be contributing to our procrastination. So this could include increased course load and rigor, maybe classes that are harder than you've ever taken before, or that have more assignments and projects and papers due than you've ever had to do. You also have other additional responsibilities going into college, such as having to stay more organized and self-disciplined, not having parents to kind of be the ones to urge you to keep on track if that was your experience growing up, or other family members that are kind of more involved in your schooling. You're much more independent. It's also having to take care of your basic needs outside of school, so making sure you're getting enough sleep and eating regularly. As we like to say, iced coffee is not a meal, and that's calling myself out on that one. And then also making sure that you're having a balance of work, school, and social life. So some of us also are keeping a job to keep up with expenses and cost of living, and we have some other additional responsibilities that are just taking all of our time and all of our energy and all of our personal resources. So that can lead to us feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and those two things can be combined into a decreased motivation, and that decreased motivation is a really large contributor to procrastination. So thinking about that, there are some other things that can contribute to procrastination, but we want to unpack that a little bit deeper by going into what the actual science is here soon. I do want to talk a little bit more about motivation though, so let's stay on that topic for a second. Reflecting on what your motivations are that brought you to where you are today, maybe sitting in this room or on the Zoom chat, thinking about procrastination, it might be helpful to reflect. Why did you decide to go to college? What led you to choose your major? What are your personal values that you hold important? What is necessary for you to live a life that you are proud of? And how does your day-to-day life reflect that pursuit of what is most important to you? So just take a moment to yourself to think about that for a second. Keeping those things in mind, those will come back as we work through some of our activities later, but I want you to be thinking about those questions throughout this presentation and then after you leave here today, as it will be really key to addressing how procrastination affects you personally. So what do we know about procrastination? Well, it is dictionarily defined as the act of unnecessarily and voluntarily delaying or postponing something despite knowing that there will be negative consequences for doing so. We'll talk a little bit about why I don't necessarily agree with that definition in just a moment. But it also is shown that everyone does it at some point in their life. Procrastination is nothing that is a you-only problem. It's something that is very common. And actually, between 50 to 75% of college students are what we call habitual procrastinators, where it is something that they do very regularly and chronically. And it's also correlated with increased levels of stress, anxiety, and sleep problems. And you can also find out later in this presentation how an increase in prolonged exposure to stress, particularly negative stress, can lead to burnout. And we'll talk about what burnout is. And stress doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. Stress can be a positive thing where it helps to motivate us. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we wait till the last minute, is because we have that sudden rush of urgency that stress helps us to push through and finally get that thing done. But again, prolonged exposure to it, having that be a regular occurrence, may not always be the most beneficial thing. So going back to that dictionary definition, the word that stands out to me is voluntarily. Is it really voluntary? I want to unpack the science a little bit. So we'll break it down into as simplistic terms as I can possibly do so. When we actually look at studies of what procrastination looks like in the brain, it's actually a battle of the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, which you can see on that image of the brain down in the lower left of the screen, or the lower right, excuse me. The limbic system is more in the center of the brain. Something that is more in the center of the brain is something that developed evolutionarily earlier on in our history as human beings, sort of our caveman brain, our lizard brain, if you will. And then anything that's further out, the cortex or the wrinkly part on the outside, is something that developed later in our evolutionary journey. And the prefrontal cortex at the front is actually what developed last and most recently, only in the last few 100,000 years. So in the battle of the limbic system and prefrontal cortex, let's look at a little bit of what each of those two systems do and how they interact. So the limbic system is more about your motivation to act, your emotional regulation, your learning and your memory, both short-term and long-term. And it's also about seeking out pleasurable experiences or things that are pleasing to you, as well as avoiding discomfort. So trying to stay away from anything that is distressing or painful. And then the prefrontal cortex is more involved with executive functioning, such as controlling those impulses, thinking and planning, and judgment making and decision making, kind of differentiating between what's important and prioritizing. And there may be some causes that kind of inhibit the prefrontal cortex and make the limbic system the one that is more responsible for that procrastination in some of us. We'll talk about why that might be. But looking at a meta-analysis that shows the strongest predictors of what procrastination, what contributes to procrastination, we're looking at task aversiveness. So that means how unpleasant that task is subjectively to us, the way that we conceptualize and think about the task. And then task delay. It shows that if there is more time between when you find out about the task and when it's actually due or the deadline, you're more likely to procrastinate on it rather than if it's something that's really approaching soon. And then self-efficacy. This is our belief in ourselves and our abilities to do things. So if we have a negative perception of ourselves and thinking that we don't have the ability to do this and we really talk ourselves down, we're much more likely to put something off because that's a really unpleasant experience to have to sit there with our lack of self-esteem and self-efficacy. And then impulsivity. This does have a genetic component, particularly for folks with ADHD. It does have a 46% heritability rate in twin studies that have been done. So it is something that you may not necessarily have the most control over. Again, going back to the limbic system kind of being the one to be more in control at times. And then conscientiousness, this has to do with your self-control, distractibility, organization, and achievement motivation. This is one of those big 5 personality traits that people measure when looking at how individuals differ personality-wise. And some of us have different levels on that spectrum of conscientiousness that are just inherent to us. So that's sort of what the science says. Any questions about any of that before I move on? So we're going to do a little activity for anyone who doesn't have anything to write with or write on, such as paper and pens. I do have some of that for you here in person. But what we're going to do is list at least 2 to 3 examples for each of these categories, or as many as apply to you that you think would help you to assess fully how procrastination affects you. So we want to look specifically at what do you procrastinate on? How do you procrastinate? Where do you procrastinate? When do you procrastinate? Why? And then how does it affect you or other people? So I'll give you maybe like, let's say 10 or so minutes to kind of, you can collaborate with other people, you can write it down to yourself and just kind of reflect on that, because we'll be using this for a later activity that will be, again, more collaborative later on in the presentation. So if we could just take some time to do that, we'll reconvene at 1:23. We'll reconvene in just a minute, but I want to check in. If anyone needs more time, please say so in the chat or just let me know if you're in person. All right, we'll go ahead and reconvene now. So if anyone would like to share, they absolutely can. I know we had someone in the chat who was awesome and was able to put why they procrastinate. So that can help other people feel like, hey, maybe I do that too, and kind of get some common ground with folks. I think that that's a really important thing to do, is to share with everyone what we experience if we're comfortable, so that we can kind of see like, hey, I'm not the only one who does this, but no one has to share if they don't want to. So I will just pose it to the large group, including those on Zoom. How did we feel doing this exercise? And if you want to share something that was relevant from one of the questions, what would you like to share? Yeah.
I procrastinate doing study assignments, and chores, but I do chores to procrastinate on the assignments.
I see. Yeah, that's a pretty common thing, is doing something else productive instead of the thing that we wanted that is less desirable that's also productive.
And also, I feel like I do all my studying at night. Like during the day, I feel like, oh, I have all day to start this, and then I only start it once, like once nighttime.
Yeah, there's a lot of us who may have actually a different circadian rhythm that may affect when we have our peak energy. Some of us are morning people, some of us are night people, some of us get that like mid-afternoon slump around this time of day. So if you're feeling it, I'm kind of feeling it too. I need some coffee. But yeah, definitely, like there's folks who kind of do a little bit better at night also. Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, for me, it's like, I'll try to start early on. Like, okay, like it's due by 11:59, so let's start at like 3. And then somehow I don't like lock in. I kind of just like try half-assed. Like, I don't know. I don't really try very hard, and I end up wasting like 2 or 3 hours like doing like kind of distractible work. And then I miss out on like hanging out with my friends or doing something else at the end of the day, because I didn't like really spend 2 to 3 hours of like hard work. I ended up making it like 6 hours of, I don't know, like not very productive time. So
yeah, that actually is something that, even though I didn't include it in this presentation when I was doing research for this presentation, something that they have found is that folks who procrastinate actually do end up doing more work than folks who don't procrastinate, because they don't always work as efficiently and they feel like they're sort of dragging themselves along, and it's hard to get a momentum going. Because once you have a momentum, you can kind of efficiently and speedily go through something. But if you don't feel any sort of positive way about what you're doing, you're sort of just dragging your feet. And if you also left something off to the last minute, chances are you weren't super prepared to do the assignment, right? So then you had to go out of your way and do some extra research to make sure that you knew how to do it correctly. And then that takes up even more time than you anticipated. So that is a great thing that you shared, because it's very true. The research does support that as being a common thing. Anyone else that wanted to share thoughts or responses? Yeah, it felt good to write it down. Sometimes like we don't always take the time to sit and reflect on our motivations and what contributes to something that has probably been really bothering you, since I don't think you would be in here if it wasn't something that was bothering you, right? So having to see it all on paper right in front of you instead of just living as like buzzing bees in your brain that it's super disorganized and you break it down question by question, it's a little less daunting and intimidating, which is kind of the point of this exercise. You know, it might not fix everything to see it on paper, but it's a place to start. And we'll talk about throughout this presentation what to do with this information. So moving forward, I decided, what does Google have to say? Because that's what we all do, right? When we don't know the answer to something, we Google it. So what does Google have to say about how to stop procrastinating? So I want you to understand why this is set up the way that it is. Everything that was said more often is bigger, and things that were said less often in the articles that I read were smaller. And it goes also in color order. So red was said the most often, orange a little less often, etc., all the way down to blue and purple. So looking here, what are some things that you see that really stand out to you as like, maybe I've tried that and it works, tried it and it doesn't work, or I never thought to try that? Are there any reactions? Yeah.
For planning your day, I plan my day a lot. I actually like do like when I plan my week, and a lot of the times I feel like I fall behind my plan, and so it just ends up like I end up replanning every day.
I see. So maybe it's really structured and rigid, and then if you get thrown off even a little bit, it kind of throws everything else off track. Got it. Yeah, that's a really good point. Anyone else? Responses? Reactions? Yeah, so you sort of become desensitized to your own sense of rewarding yourself. It becomes less of a reward and more of just a given. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, it's much more discouraging, like you said. It's hard to feel like I can do this if the thoughts in your head are telling you like, I can't do this and I already messed up, what's even the point, right? And then that sort of spirals and just kind of becomes what we think of in the counseling world as a cognitive distortion, which is a pattern of negative thinking that influences our behaviors. So we'll talk a little bit about some of these like major ones on here, and I want you to also see something that I noticed, that some of these are kind of contradictory. So some of them say like, start with something really small. And other ones say like, do the biggest task first, the most intimidating task first. So it kind of depends, like what's going to be the right advice for you to follow along with. So that's what I kind of want to talk about. You know, you're getting all this feedback of what do you do? Well, it kind of depends looking back on the exercise you just did. Not everything is going to work for you. So you have to kind of figure out based on the who, what, when, where, why, how, that's what's going to help you figure out what advice is going to be the most effective for you, or at least a place to start. Because you may end up trying something and realize, no, this isn't going to work. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these things. Maybe. So, I think did I skip one? I might have skipped one. I did. Okay, so this is also an activity that's going to be related to what you just did with, to yourself or with another person. So setting SMART goals. What does the SMART acronym stand for? Well, it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant or realistic, and time-bound. So breaking each of those down a little bit more, to make something specific, that would be the who, what, when, where, and why, and make it so that if someone else were to read your goal, they know exactly what you're going to do and how you're going to achieve it, not just something that you know how to interpret. And then measurable, something that you're able to track the progress as you go along to see, I'm making actual steps towards this, is unambiguous. And you can also tell definitively that like I've achieved this, I can check it off. Achievable, so that's going to say, you don't want it to be so easy that you can get it done with almost no effort, but you don't want it to be so challenging that it's too intimidating for you to even start. So you want to find some middle ground and make it possible also within your given time frame and with the available resources that you have at your disposal, mentally, physically, financially, energetically, things of that nature. And then relevant, realistic. So you want to have goals that align with your values and long-term vision. Make these goals for you, not your sibling, not your mom or your grandma or whoever else that might have an influence in your life. Make them for you if you can. And then also be honest with yourself and not try to be so idealistic. If you're trying to say, I'm going to run a marathon next month, and you've never even gotten off the couch before, that's probably more idealistic than realistic, right? You want to start a little smaller, or maybe make it a longer goal to work towards. And then that kind of gets into making it time bound. You want to have an end date with checkpoints along the way that you can sort of check in with yourself and see, did I actually meet my sub goals, my smaller objectives that lead me along the way to my final endpoint. And so for this really brief activity, I would like you to write at least 2 SMART goals for yourself based on the information that you wrote down in the first activity that address some of those factors contributing to your procrastination. And I gave a couple of examples here on the side of the screen of like what might be a not so great goal and then what might be a more SMART goal. Now yours don't have to mirror exactly that formatting, but it's just to give you an idea of, you know, how specific you could be to make it, you know, very in line with what you're trying to accomplish. So take maybe like, let's see, maybe like 5 minutes to write a couple goals for yourself, and then we'll reconvene. So that would be at 1:37. All right, so we'll go ahead and reconvene. Again, I'd like to pose it to the large group, both people on Zoom and here in person with me. Maybe what is one of the goals that you wrote for yourself? I know we had one person in the chat who shared their goals, so we can have another idea of what other people are writing about. So they said, I will review biology class notes for 45 minutes in the morning after classes. And then another goal that they will study for their TEAS exam on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays after 4 p.m. Awesome. Oops, I didn't mean to click. Go back. My apologies. So is there anyone else who would like to share, if not the goal itself, what was this experience like of writing a goal like this, maybe for the first time that you've ever tried this method?
Really nice. I feel like I've been very down on the page that I wanted to do to feel like I have a better vision.
Yeah, and so even though it doesn't say in this activity, what I would love to encourage you all to do outside of this workshop is to maybe make some smaller sub goals for each of those that are still following the SMART acronym. So maybe some smaller objectives of how you'll do that, like making sure that you turn off your phone, or you communicate with your roommates that you're going to be studying from this time to this time, and to not knock on your door or ask you to invite you places or something like that. Maybe trying to find some smaller goals that you can help you get to that larger goal. And then something else we'll talk about a little bit later as well that I want to keep in mind is that, it's not the end of the world if you don't meet your goal within a certain time frame, or if you have some missteps along the way. And we'll talk a little bit about what to do if that happens. But is there anyone else who would like to share some thoughts or feedback about what they wrote down? Yeah.
I put that, I basically kind of down, but for cat, because I need studying for cat.
Yeah.
So I would go over cat for 1 hour, Tuesday and Thursday, because I consistently skip my chem lectures because they're not mandatory. So I'm like, oh, I'll look over this later, and then I never do.
Yeah, definitely not having that sense of pressure of having it be mandatory. It's something that you have to sort of put the pressure on yourself, but not to the point of procrastinating.
Also, the lectures really hurt.
Yes.
So I need to find like a good time for the day where I don't necessarily have to go to lunch, but I just go and capture that at the same time.
Yeah, I like that what you're saying is that you're also being realistic with yourself. If it's not, I'm going to attend lecture every single week at every single time that it's scheduled. I know that sleep is going to be more important to the other things that I have to get done in a day. And so I'm still going to make time to work on my chemistry, even if I don't end up attending lecture. Yeah.
These goals don't have to be like necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
You can just be like, for today, I'll do this.
Yeah, you can have smaller, like just for today, this is what I'm going to do. You can absolutely make it in that format. Awesome. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I tend to like fill up my schedule randomly, like random things like, oh, like a workshop or something. So I can't commit to like, oh yeah, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, this time.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It goes back to what I was saying before, that this may not work for everybody, but this is one of the most recommended things that they say to do when you look up how to stop procrastinating. And research does support this for the most part, but it does depend on each individual. So we'll move on to the next part. So this is talking about planning your day. There are a lot of different calendar apps and stuff that you can use, or you may be more of a physical planner, a bullet journal person. Actually, bullet journals were designed by people with who have ADHD for people with ADHD. It is meant to treat and not treat. It's meant to support people who have ADHD and need some help organizing and structuring themselves in their day. So some things about planning your day that are going to help you from feeling stuck or overwhelmed would be that you want to try to keep it consistent, but be flexible. So if, for example, something comes up and your car breaks down and you're not going to make it home in time to study for that time block that you had laid out, if you have somewhere else in your schedule where you have a nothing spot that if you can fit that in, that can be your backup slot if something else comes up and you can't commit to something during that original time. So having some flexibility, like if I can't do it then, I'll have another opportunity to do it again. So that might be something to keep in mind as well. And then time blocking versus task blocking. So this means you may either want to say for 2 hours, whatever I can get done for my biology class in those 2 hours, that's what I'm going to do. Or you could say, I'm going to work on this particular homework assignment until it is done, whatever time amount it takes. So it can be beneficial to do one versus the other, depending on who you are and what your schedule looks like, but you may want to keep in mind which way is going to work better for you. You may also want to prioritize your tasks. There's the very famous Mark Twain quote about eating the frog. It says, if it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first. So that kind of goes back to if you have something that's really hard, that's going to take a lot of time and energy and effort, try to get that out of the way first if you can, and then do the smaller things later. So that way you don't run out of momentum by the time it's time to do that really big daunting task. You also may want to break down those big daunting tasks into smaller ones. So if you have that you're going to clean your room, maybe instead of just saying cleaning your room, you say, okay, I'm going to make my bed. All right, and then I'm going to sweep, and then I'm going to put away my laundry. So trying to find smaller things that you can check off your list. And I don't know if you're like me, but seeing myself like do the little checkbox in my planner gives me more satisfaction than actually doing the task itself. So that can also be something to motivate you if you're just very easily motivated like that. And then try to avoid multitasking. There's tons of research that shows that this just doesn't work. It doesn't exist, even though we like to think it does. Your brain cannot verbally process things that are being, if you're listening to a podcast and trying to read, you're not processing both at the same time. You're processing one or the other, and usually only halfway for each of them. So you're missing parts of both. So it's really not efficient. And it uses actually more mental energy than if you were to focus on just one task at a time. Setting reminders for yourself, if you're someone who tends to forget to look at your planner or your apps, or if you have something where you just need accountability from an external source, having some sort of alarms or reminders on your phone, on your computer, on sticky notes that you leave around your house, whatever works for you. And then factoring in break times. You need a mental break, and that is something that you need to prioritize just as much as getting your homework done or cleaning your room. So try to find in specific times, like from 3 to 4 p.m. on Fridays, I do nothing. Whatever I want to do during that time is up to me, but I'm not doing any homework. I'm not doing anything for my job. I'm not cleaning anything. I'm just relaxing, whatever that looks like to you. All right. So it also talks about removing distractions. So you may want to choose an environment that's conducive to productivity and focus. If that means that you work better when there's some background noise, maybe a cafe would work. If not, maybe going to the library on one of the higher floors that's quieter might be more for you, where you're surrounded by other people that are also trying to focus. And instead of being tempted to procrastinate and do other things, you're seeing like, well, everyone else is doing what they're supposed to do, so maybe I should too. But it kind of depends on you and if that's how your brain works. Also, try to put your phone on Do Not Disturb or just somewhere out of sight, maybe in another room, or even if it's an extreme situation, give it to your roommate and be like, don't give this back to me until I show you that I have done my homework assignment. If that works for you, obviously some of us need to be on call for certain things, whether it's family members, friends, or a job, but that is something that is an option. Listen to music without lyrics if you can. If you are someone who works better with noise, if you have things that are verbally going into your ears, you're sometimes tuning into the verbal parts of that and you're not paying attention to what you're reading or writing. So again, you're half paying attention to both things and not fully paying attention to either thing. Communicate your boundaries with people in your life that may interfere with your schedule or your productivity time. Like I said earlier, if you need to just kind of communicate like, hey, during this time to this time, don't invite me to things, don't expect me to come hang out with you, like this is my dedicated study time, but then after that, it's fair game. Just kind of communicate respectfully in whatever way that makes sense between the dynamics of your social peeps to kind of communicate those boundaries to them. Choose your study groups wisely. If you know that you're going to be tempted to just like talk about anything else other than what you're supposed to be talking about with those people, maybe don't study with them. That's why maybe having like your best friend be your study buddy is not always the most effective, but having people you kind of know in class might be more effective. It's also why we plug peer tutoring and SI through SARC, because you may not always know everyone in the class, but everyone is there for the same purpose of like learning. So that might be an option. And then temporary website blocker apps are also an option. Again, if you feel like it's just too much of a temptation if I have my laptop or my phone open and I have to do work on that medium, you can set a timer that it's going to stay blocked until like 5 p.m. So that's an option too. And then we also want you to be kind to yourself, which I'm really glad that our friend here in the back also brought that up. So reward your efforts with positive reinforcement and treat yourself. But like we also said from Allie, we don't want to over reward ourselves or overindulge. You want to make those things really special and something that you can look forward to. If you find you're not really looking forward to it, then it's not going to be that motivating anymore. But you do want to acknowledge that, like, hey, you've been working really hard, and that's worth acknowledgement. Also, forgive your mistakes and slip ups. Like we said, we want to acknowledge that we're human and things happen and get in our way, or we just don't have the energy today to do what we normally do. And sometimes we just need a mental health day, and communicate that with other people so that they know that I just needed some time. And then recognizing the signs of burnout. So I've listed them here on the side for you. And we talked at the beginning of the presentation, the difference between stress and burnout. Stress can be positive or negative, and it can be motivating. Burnout is when you're exposed to stress for a prolonged period of time and it starts to become a hindrance to your mental and physical well-being. So some of those signs of burnout could be health problems, like getting sick more often, not being able to sleep, not feeling hungry, or feeling really, really hungry more than you normally are and eating more, having a lot of low energy, clenching your jaw. TMJ is actually a really common thing amongst college students where they get diagnosed with it for the first time. That's where your jaw starts clicking and getting really tense and locking up sometimes from stress. And then muscle tension and pain. If you start feeling like your muscles are really sore and you're carrying a lot of tension, it almost feels like you've been working out too hard, that might be a sign that you need to take some time and relax and address the burnout. And then there's also mental burnout, where you might feel more depressed. You might experience suicidal ideation or thoughts. It can either be passive, whether just like, I wouldn't care if I didn't wake up tomorrow. Those are things that you want to address. If you start to have those thoughts, you need to tell someone and you need to seek out help if you can. You might have some feelings of worthlessness, like I'm just not living up to my own expectations or others' expectations and I'm not good enough. You might find that you have a loss of pleasure or interest in things that normally would be really special and fun and entertaining for you. That's also a sign to kind of check in with yourself, like, hey, maybe I'm overextending myself. Concentration issues, again, a lot of people in college may think like, maybe I just have undiagnosed ADHD and I never knew it. And for some people that might be true, but for a lot of people, they might just be burnt out and they don't have the mental clarity to focus, because loss of concentration can also be a sign of depression and anxiety. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sign of ADHD. Could be, but it isn't necessarily. And then anger or irritability, that's also a sign of depression too. A lot of people think of depression as just being sad, but a lot of people, especially men, do tend to exhibit anger as their primary expression of their depression. And so you can also be very irritable. And then a sense of detachment from other people. If you start to self-isolate and you don't have the energy for social outings to the degree that you used to, that might be something, again, to check in with yourself. And then going back to here, our tips on the left, surround yourself with supportive people, people who make you feel good and encouraged and that are of the same mindset in the sense that they want to see you succeed. They want you to achieve your goals. Maybe they have similar goals and you can kind of work on them together as an accountability. And then you also want to address those underlying conditions that I just talked about. If you feel like you may have depression, anxiety, ADHD, or some other underlying condition, you need to get that checked. That is a form of self-care. And going to a doctor or a psychiatrist, no matter how much work it is, and that can be something we procrastinate too, is making that doctor appointment. It is important that we do it because it's going to save us so much energy and time and frustration in the long run. You do not have to live life on hard mode. You can actually have a life that is worth living and not super frustrating and keeping you down. So I want to sort of start to close off this presentation by just listing some helpful resources that are available to you as UCF students, either for free or low cost. What you're paying with tuition and fees every semester, that's what these are going towards. And there's probably not going to be any other time in your life after you leave college where you'll have all of these resources at your disposal in one location. So please take advantage of these. If you have any questions about what some of these are, or if you need additional resources, you can speak to me after this presentation and we can talk about that, because I do have some others. Or if you need some that are outside of campus, I can also help you try to find those as well. So if you need to take a picture of this, or if you know someone else who might need these resources, feel free to write these down, take note of them. But these are ways to access or to address your self-care so that procrastination does not have to be this only a you problem. It can be something that you seek support for. And on that note, I would just like to say thank you. If you wouldn't mind, while you still have some time here, I will be staying here for the last like 9 or so minutes to answer any questions you might have. or to continue the discussion. But if you could scan that QR code to leave an evaluation of the presentation that you got to see today. Your feedback is very valuable to us, and it helps us to improve for future semesters when we give presentations like these. So we do really value whether it's positive, negative, or neutral, just any feedback that you have. And then before anyone leaves, please also just stick around if you haven't scanned the QR code or if you haven't registered through Penji. That'll be really important for us as well. Check the chat. Yeah, so for the person who asked if we could send the PowerPoint file to the chat, I will try to do that, but I also want to let everyone know that this has been recorded. So it will be posted on YouTube eventually, so you'll be able to see it again. But I will try to find the file here once I pause the recording. Yeah, thank you all for coming. Give me 1 second, and I will bring us back to the Penji QR code so that we can get attendance.